What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It is your boy Kevin Forte coming to you today to talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Is this the year for the Toronto Maple Leafs? They've taken some criticism here at the deadline for the lack of big moves, and we're going to discuss the Leafs today in this video and what I think of them going into their playoff run, hopefully for 2024. All right, so let's get right into it. So looking at the lineup for the Maple Leafs, this is a good hockey team. I mean, a lot of people can look at this roster and say, yeah, that's at the very least a playoff team, but the question is, how deep of a run can they go on? Because as you get deeper into the playoffs, when injuries start to occur, how much depth do you have behind what you have already on your opening night roster? And that's kind of where things have gone for the Leafs. Looking at their group, they got Bertuzzi, Matthews, and Järnkrok. That's the top line right now. So we're obviously seeing a little bit of a shifting of the lines here moving down. We've got Domi, Tavares, and Nylander, Nyes, Kampf, and McCann, Holmberg, Dewar, and Reeves. So that's your forward group. Now, obviously, there is some huge missing pieces here. Obviously, not having Mitch Marner there, I expect, it says here on Daily Faceoff, he's out because of COVID. I don't know exactly what's going on with that, but he's listed as out today. You're missing two defensemen, John Klingberg and Mark Giordano. Klingberg's on IR. Giordano is also on IR, but he's listed as day-to-day, so probably closer to a return. But looking at the defense with those two missing, you've got Brody, McCabe, Riley, Lyubushkin, Edmondson, and Liljegren. So that's your defense going into the playoffs, again, depending on what happens with Giordano and Klingberg. So, right now when I look at this Leafs team, it's a pretty good team. And again, with Marner up front, obviously being in the lineup helps. But this is a team that should be a playoff team. Right, this is a team we expect to make the playoffs. We expect them to be in the running. And based off where they sit right now, this is looking like a playoff team. You look where they sit right now, they sit pretty comfortable third in the division. You've got Florida and Boston ahead of you with 94 and 93 points respectively. And then the Leafs have 84 points. And they kind of find themselves in their own spot, 8 points away from Tampa, who's fourth in the division. And then they also find themselves 9 points back of Boston for second. So they're kind of in their own world there at third in the Atlantic. But that's a good thing, right? Because you'd rather be in the middle of those two than closer to Tampa. And, especially a team like Tampa, we know how that team can go. They can turn it on quick. And I think right now, if I'm a Leafs fan, I'm pretty comfortable with this team making the playoffs. But there's a lot of other things that, should be kind of put into the conversation. So the power play for the Leafs has been good. It's 26%, well above average, which is around 20%. Penalty kill struggles again. Nothing really new there for the Leafs. That's been a theme for a really long time now. They score a lot of goals. Goals for is third best in the National Hockey League, and their goals against is 16th best. So dead middle of the pack, which is actually an improvement on where the Leafs defense and, the giving up goals thing hasn't been too kind of the Leafs over the last couple of years, but it seems to be getting a little bit better there. Okay, so now we look at their schedule, because now down the stretch, you're trying to make the playoffs, you're trying to go on a run, what kind of games are we talking about? Like, is this going to be a difficult schedule? Maybe an easier schedule? Looking right now, you've got Carolina and Philly and Washington and Edmonton and Carolina. So really, up until really the next 2 weeks is going to be a very difficult schedule for the Leafs. There is no doubt about it. Things will calm down slightly, but this is I would argue, one of the more difficult schedules down the stretch. Really the easiest team they're going to play, they play Montreal in April 6th. Pittsburgh and New Jersey are kind of on the outside of the playoffs looking in, but they have a bunch of games against Carolina, Philly, Washington, Florida, Tampa, the Devils, the Penguins, and the Red Wings. None of those teams are all pretty much fighting it out still, right? The white flag is out for the Devils and the Penguins, and maybe by the end of the season, that back-to-back with the Devils won't mean so much. But to this point, those teams are still, fighting, and they have no reason to completely blow it up until the end of the season. They're not tanking Pittsburgh and New Jersey. So they're going to give their all the rest of the way. So those aren't going to be easy games, even though you would say maybe those are easier games. They're not going to be handed to the Leafs. Then you look at the rest of the schedule, right? So Carolina, they play two times. So Carolina twice. They play Philly once. Washington, they play two more times. So they play Carolina and Washington twice. They play Pittsburgh once. They play New Jersey 3 more times here down the stretch. They play Edmonton. They play Montreal. They play Florida 2 more times. They play the Lightning 2 more times. And they play the Red Wings and Buffalo each once. So this schedule is doable for the Leafs. With where their aspirations are, with where we expect them to be, they should be able to win those games. But this is not an easy schedule. There's no Chicagos in here. There's no Anaheims. There's no teams that are like literally tanking. They are not playing any of those teams. There's no Arizonas on the schedule the rest of the way. There's no easy cupcake wins. So for the Leafs, this is perfect, because this is going to make them have to stay on their game, their P's and Q's, the rest of the way. There's no easy outs here. And I think that's the best thing for the Leafs. And the reason that is, like I said, it's going to keep them motivated. It's going to keep them on their toes. Every night that they have a game, they're going to be tested to see where their barometer is. Where are they on the scale? Are they good enough? And they can measure that every single game. It's not going to be like, well, we'll have a 5-0 blowout victory over Arizona. Well, is that really a respectable win because they're toward the bottom of the standings? Is that really worth anything? You're not going to have any of those games. Every team here is going to be competing till the end, and unless maybe New Jersey and Pittsburgh. But I think Washington, I think Buffalo, I think Detroit, those are quote-unquote non-playoff teams in the current situation, but those are teams that are going to be fighting till the end for a playoff spot, which makes them maybe even more dangerous than teams like Tampa and Florida, who are maybe going to be trying to rest guys down the stretch. Now, I don't think they're going to rest guys against the Leafs, because they know that playing the Leafs potentially in the first round or the second round, those teams are going to evaluate where they sit going into the playoffs. So I think it's one of those things where if I'm looking right now at the Leafs, is you got some really good competition here. There's a great opportunity to see where the Leafs stand. And I think this is a good opportunity for them to hold positioning, at the very least third in the division. You know, if you end up playing Tampa or Florida or Boston, that's just going to be how the scenario goes, right? Chances are they're going to have to play them. And I think the Leafs are one of those teams that can't be afraid to play anybody. You know, it's one of those things where it doesn't really matter like who you're playing in the first round, because if you get past the first round, which you're hoping to, you're going to play one of them in the second round. And then you get to the best of whatever's left in the East, in the Metro, or maybe one of the wild card teams in the Atlantic gets there. And then you're going to play the best team out of the Western Conference. There is no easy path to the Stanley Cup. I hate when people say that. There's no such thing as an easy path to the Stanley Cup, because every team that gets there for a reason. They deserve to get there, and they were probably a real pain in the ass if they got to a deep run. And if they do it year after year, that's even more concerning and more dangerous of a team that you really need to keep an eye out. And the Florida Panthers are one of those teams. Winning the President's Trophy 2 years ago, winning the Eastern Conference last year. They are a true threat. And we obviously know the situation with Boston, right? Boston is one of those teams that I know the Leafs would love to beat in the playoffs. And this is a year where maybe Boston looks a little more vulnerable than they really have in the past decade. And this is a situation where, you know, the Leafs can really beat a team in Boston that is doable. As much as maybe mentally it doesn't feel like it for Leaf fans, this could be that year for them. And, you know, like I said, I think right now with where they sit, you want to gain a little ground on Tampa and Detroit and Buffalo. All three of those teams are behind you in the division. You really want to win those games, right? And, like I said, I think it's a good thing that they play Tampa a couple times, because that's going to be another opportunity for you to gain some ground on them. And those are 4-point games, right? So they play Tampa 2 more times down the stretch, 2 more times in April. That's great, because that's 2 points you're getting that they're not 2 times. So if they win both those games, that's 4 points that the Leafs got, and that's 4 points that the Lightning theoretically didn't get, right? If obviously the game doesn't go to an overtime or shootout. And that kind of falls the same way for the Red Wings. Not so much the Panthers, but really you're looking at more Florida. Detroit, Tampa, and Buffalo. There's a couple really important 4-point games here down the stretch for the Leafs to make sure they make the playoffs and punch their ticket to the dance. And like I said, kind of going back to some of the decisions they made at the deadline, a lot of people will criticize them for not making enough moves. I think they did a good job. I think that based off the situation, based off the circumstance, would you have liked to have seen another center? Absolutely. I think Alexander Wenberg would have been a great fit for the Leafs, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on that front. And you look at teams that did that, right? The Rangers added Wenberg. Edmonton added Adam Henrique, right? Those are the type of guys that the Leafs really could have used down the middle here. Let's be completely honest. And as much as I think I'm okay with it now, if they do get deeper into the playoffs and they play some of these teams, that center matchup might not be kind to them. And, as much as I kind of have, I'm not a huge fan of the Leafs defense, it is better than it's been in years past. It's just going to come down, at the end of the day, this season for the Leafs is going to be all about the big guys. Can the big guys do what they have to do? And it's going to be difficult because, again, matchup-wise, they don't necessarily have a ton of threatening depth. So teams are going to focus their attention on shutting down Matthews, Marner, and Nylander. That's going to be the primary focus of other teams playing the Leafs. And that's why a lot of teams have success against the Leafs in the playoffs, is they focus on shutting those guys down. And that's kind of all they have to do. And that's where you're going to need to see the emergence of the other guys on the Leafs. That's where we're going to need to see the Bobby McMahons, the Connor Dewars, the Matthew Nyes, the the Max Domis of the world kind of coming into their own and adding that depth scoring that they're going to need. And like I said, I think the Leafs have a decent roster here. This is a team that can compete. We've seen lesser teams get further in the playoffs than this Leafs current roster, but that doesn't mean that it's the rule, and it's more likely the exception. But I think based off the experience that this team has all across the roster, whether they were with the Leafs or not, this is a team that is capable of making some noise in the playoffs. And, let's be honest, as much as it matters the top guys, they need the combination of the top guys doing their job, the defensemen not turning the puck over and being good defensively sound, and you need good goaltending. And I think that's really going to be important for the Leafs going into the playoffs because Samsonov and Wall have had their moments of success, had their moments of failure this season. It's just a matter of, can either one of them get hot into the playoffs? And that's going to be the recipe of success for the Leafs. As much as we love to see them add Jake Gensel or some of these guys that were available like Wenberg or Henrique or some of the other guys that were talked about, it's all over now. Now the Leafs need to focus on what they need to do. The inability to trade a second-round draft pick for another depth center at the deadline doesn't matter in round one, game one of the playoffs. It's all about going out there and executing. And if the Leafs want to keep this band together, if they want to find success and not fall into mediocrity, they know what they have to do. So that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Hopefully you liked this video. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. And I'll see you again next time. Peace out, guys.